instead of boring you with all the text along the bottom of the screen, we decided to tell you about the experience as we drive through it. So this is our drive back, right at the end of the trip where we're going back from where we were staying in the Lofotens, right the way back to Tromsø, and then the next day we had to unfortunately fly home from this amazing scenery.
This is really we're starting in the absolute best stuff already. I mean, not to say that there isn't amazing stuff to come, but I think the area around Rhine, Sørvågen, is probably some of the best scenery in the world, not just within this particular locale. And you'll see loads of pictures of people that have taken photos of this particular mountain up here, the village here, especially up from the Rhine viewpoint, which we walked up to on one of the days we were there. And I have to say, it's probably one of the best sort of one-day hikes you can ever do.
I think it took us about an hour to get to the top, but those steps were brutal.
Oh yeah, they were pretty tiring, but I think that you always felt encouraged to keep on going just because you knew the reward was going to be something else.
I think there was like 1,200 or something, and it kind of counted them down. And then the reward, you thought, oh, it must only be maybe 600 or something, we've not seen a marker in a while. And then you get one that says 800 and you think, yes, we're actually doing this, we're getting towards the top.
Getting there, and then the views of this place are just stunning, but even just as you're sort of driving through it on these bridges, and one of the things you'll see often, I think we just passed some there, are these sort of scaffolds where they dried out fish. What's it called again? Turfisken?
Turfisken.
Turfisk, yeah. Which is an iconic foodstuff of the area, and the smell is just, you know when you kind of remember a smell for the rest of your life. When I see these images, it just sort of conjures up that kind of memory for me.
It's definitely don't go to the Lofotens if you have an issue with weird smelling fish. Let's put it that way.
Don't worry, you do acclimatise to it. And these are the weird hat tunnels. They're not really tunnels per se, they're just sort of like weird lids with pillars on them.
This bit of road seems really modern, so I'm guessing it's been updated in the... I probably did actually look at the times at one point, but they've gone out of my mind. I don't think it's that relevant. But yeah, most of the road, at least at this side of it, is this more sort of narrow bit. But one of the things I suppose that we had on this drive back is this amazing weather right at the start of the day. It does get its usual kind of Norwegian grey as we go through.
Just going over the Kirkener. I picked up that ridiculous pronunciation while we were there, but it's actually, I think it's the Korkenbrua.
Which sounds nothing like the voice that we gave it there. But this area is something special, and this kind of, the hour drive from where we were staying to the other end of, we're actually on another island now, but these kind of two islands sort of go side by side, and they were by far some of the best scenery that I've ever seen. And to have this as like the local drive for the sort of 5 days we were staying here was, yeah, I kind of miss being able to just get in the car and go along these roads.
Passed a couple of amazing bridges there. Another one of these sort of iconic photo stops that a lot of people do, but the bridges really complement the landscape. You've got this huge mountain which looks impenetrable, sort of staring in front of you, but you probably could get up it from the back because it's a lot gentler behind. Yeah,
it definitely seemed to go and then, so we just climb up the other side and then you'll get to the top. If I hadn't thought about it, it could have been a walk we would have done, but one of the issues with this area, and I suppose in any kind of mountainous, cold, wet country, is a lot of the time the weather was just drizzle and rain and you couldn't see that much. So when we did get these kind of glimpses between where the mountains jumped out of the landscape and you actually got to see the tops, it just made it even better. Especially with the ones that you can see on now. Those were, yeah, it's
amazing. So I think this was the only time we really saw these particular mountains in any detail. On the very last day, the whole rest of the time we were there, they were shrouded in mist, and really just we didn't know exactly what lay under them, but they were very intimidating looking in a good way. And then was it just off that road there was the one to the heritage village?
That was, oh, what's the name of it? I can't remember. Nusfjord?
Nusfjord, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It was like a preserved fishing village. You had to pay to go in, but it made you kind of, it took away a lot of the modern village or the modern kind of towns that you get. They have the bigger factories on them, but this place retains its character from before modernisation really took over. And it just felt, it was a really good way to spend the afternoon. We got to walk up to a lighthouse and then got absolutely soaked by the rain, but yeah. that's part of the fun of the Lofotens.
And they've just got a nice sort of museum area, and then a really nice cafe as well, a little gift shop, but done in you're almost in somebody's house. It felt like a traditional house from the times. It was just well worth the small fee to get in, and I would recommend it.
I think it's with these things, it kind of gives you that hint of like the culture of the islands as well as just the beauty, so you can kind of link the two together, and that's what makes the experience special. What doesn't make the experience special is when you're going through a narrow tunnel and you're behind a truck that looks like it's about to rip the roof of it off in front of you and drown you, because that was a subsea tunnel, and if that roof came off then...
So that's just kind of left what we would consider our sort of local area, the kind of the sort of the home territory for that section of the holiday. We did come out a few times into this sort of area as well, but yeah, we didn't explore it in as much detail as that last bit. It kind of opens up a lot more here. There are some good mountains to be found just to the side there, but this is quite sort of open road country at this point.
And we're kind of coming into Leknes, which is like the second busiest town of the Lofotens. We never really spent any time here. Primarily, I think you would come here for the supermarkets, but there was one reasonably close to us that gave us everything that we need without us having to come all this way out just to get, you know, a bottle of juice and a pizza in an evening.
I mean, you're seeing pretty much the whole idea of the place just from the side of the road there. It's a very modern kind of town, built for purpose. Nothing wrong with that, but not obviously as nice as some places. But those mountains there at the back are a really good backdrop for it.
And there is an airport here as well, so we drove right the way into the island. So we drove in, we landed at Tromsø at the start of the trip. We then went down to Narvik for a few days, and then we came here for the rest of the time. So we drove all the way in. It's quite a long drive from Narvik, about 6 hours. But you can, if, say for example, you were flying into Norway and you only wanted to do the Lofotens, you could fly to Tromsø and then get a transfer over to Leknes airport, rather than having to do the whole long slog. Because this drive from here, for us going back to Tromsø, we left about 8 in the morning and got back at about 5 at night. I think the one disadvantage to doing this in such a long slog is it is a frustrating drive as a driver. You'll see me in this video where we're taking nearly everybody I get stuck behind, so I do apologise for any raggy driving that may be present in this video.
Speaking of raggy sort of driving situations, we've kind of passed it now, but in that little township there was a spar which was a scene of a pretty miserable experience in the car park. I think you were just getting screwed over at every opportunity to try to get out of the place.
I think, yeah, someone would come in behind us, and you know that thing where you're just about to leave and then someone else starts to move because they want to get out ahead of you, but they took literally 5 minutes to reverse in and out and mess around, and yeah, and then you're always worried that if you try and move out that they're going to reverse into you and damage the car, especially when it's a hire and you've got excessive fees to pay if somebody were to damage it. Yeah, it always puts you a bit on a knife edge when people are messing around near you. But generally, for myself, this was my 9th trip to Norway, so I'm getting fairly used to their narrow roads. I mean, they're not that different to the Scottish roads, to be honest.
A lot quieter, which helps, just generally in Norway, but it makes it a lot more chill. But I was a passenger, so I can't really pass any comment on this, but yeah, I think we're not a million miles away from the iconic bridge, are we?
Not too far. I think we've got a little bit more ambling to do, then there's like another smaller bridge that takes us to another island, and then we cross it. And we're going to mispronounce every single Norwegian name in this video, but we're currently on Vestvågøya, and then, which basically means west whatever island, and then once we cross over one other bridge which takes onto a smaller island which I think is Gimse, and then we cross the iconic bridge which takes us on to Austvegia, which is east whatever.
That mountain that's just kind of gone off view there but was ahead a minute ago, that was really kind of iconic mountain in this region, and it reminded me of kind of the landforms you get in Iceland almost. Some of the landforms here are very much like that, but also other ones are just very much their own thing here. You'll never quite see mountains like this anywhere else in the world. But what's interesting is that none of these are high, but when you're actually there and the dash cam doesn't really show you the scale of them. They're really overpowering. They feel so immense and kind of come around you. This is the bridge we mentioned earlier, the kind of...
The classic.
Yeah. We stopped for lunch, we tried to stop for lunch there at that little hut, but it was weird, it was like a weird village hall kind of thing, and we wound up in the kitchen and we didn't really know if we were meant to be in it or not, and we kind of gave up with it because it said you could get food there, but I think maybe you had to cook your own food or something.
We weren't quite sure, so we thought, right, when like neither of us speak the language, I think we both tried to learn a few bits, and I know a few words, but I couldn't really say a sentence, so it was definitely a case of if we bumped into somebody, we didn't want to seem stupid, so we just subtly left and then continued on and got lunch at the aforementioned spa, which wasn't very good.
I think down here, we turn off here for Henningsvar, don't we?
Yeah, which
it's the one that's famous for having that football pitch, you'll see, sort of the little township and the little island, and you've got the football pitch you often see pictures of. I think it's one of the most northerly in the world or something like that.
It's the one, yeah, unless you have a drone photo though, you don't really get the same impression of that football field against all the islands it sits on. It's kind of described as the Venice of Norway or the Venice of the North. It's a nice enough village. It's definitely geared for tourism, in that you park in a big car park and you kind of wander around the historic town centre, and there's not a whole lot to it. And I think it would be nice to stay for a couple of nights, but I think we definitely made the right decision by going right to the end, where there's so much more in terms of big hikes and iconic views, and having that, I would say, for the sunset. That wasn't really sunsets. We were here during Arctic summer, which means the sun didn't go down at all during the 2 weeks that we were here, although we never saw the sun at midnight because it was never up behind the clouds to begin with, but that's a different story.
Oh, the midnight sun's an amazing experience. It's so strange. I mean, like, everyone's obviously experienced daylight, so just changing the time of day that you're experiencing the daylight shouldn't really mean much, but it's just such a weird but pleasant experience to be 1 in the morning or something like that, and it's still really, really light, and it's never going to get dark.
And it kind of, for us, it went a bit dusky, but not dusk as such. It was kind of, the light went low, but you could still tell the sun would still be there if the clouds would have shifted. But it just went to this lovely, warm evening feel that never really went away. Yeah. And there was one night where it was really still and really calm, and we were out kind of just walking around and enjoying the scenery, and then we kind of sorry, I just realised what we were driving next to there. So we were enjoying this. We were kind of looking at like these reflective lakes and looking at the fishing village in the bay, looking down at Raina, and looked at the time, and it was midnight, and it was still bright as anything, just with that kind of nice sort of, imagine like 8 o'clock at night in sort of Scottish summer, where it's still definitely light and there would be like a cast over everything. It was just perfect.
I mean, I think to experience that obviously comes with the opposite, and the other end of the year it never gets light. Even at midday you might get a little bit of twilight points, and I think just that for several weeks to months on end would be punishing, wouldn't it?
I think, yeah, you would definitely take one with the other, and if you think the Scottish winters can be bad with our sort of 9 o'clock rise and 3 o'clock set, not having any daylight at all for about 2 months of the year would be very, very grating, I think. But then, I suppose if you live there, you'd be used to it, it would be your normal. Would it be that bad? I don't know, I've never experienced it. And I think, yeah, you can tell when we first arrived on the Lofotens, that guy was copying my moves there. Anyway, I need to stop watching the video I'm talking, but so what we found when we first arrived, like when we were kind of doing the mainland part before I went to the Lofotens, there wasn't that much traffic around and we were fine. And as soon as we started going onto the Lofotens, that's when the camper van numbers sort of increased exponentially. And then by the time we were going home, we were maybe about a week from the beginning of the busy season, so we kind of timed it just before it starts to get really busy. But you can definitely tell that things were ramping up. But the impression I get is a lot of the locals aren't as enamoured with the camper vans. They probably dislike them as much as we do. I think primarily because they don't provide much in the way of support for local businesses, in that they're not spending money to stay the night, they're probably just stocking up at one of the supermarkets and making their own food, whereas I don't want to sound pretentious or presumptuous about anything, but because we bought accommodation and we were going to restaurants in the towns and that kind of thing, I think we were giving more back to the economy that we were spending time in.
No, I definitely agree, but it's obviously become one of these places, sort of a mecca for camper vans. It seems to lend itself to that kind of holidaying, unfortunately, but it does mean that you can get quite a lot of aggravating sort of road problems with them and that. But yeah, they eventually start to peter out. Although they kind of continued on a little bit towards past Narvik and up to Tromsø on the way back, didn't they?
Yeah, I think a lot of that they were going to Nordkapp because that's another one of those big destinations that people want to do road trips to, and I don't blame them. When we first looked at this trip right before, we're going to go to the Arctic, and we're going to maybe have a look at the Lofoten Islands, and then we could maybe go to Nordkapp, and so we looked at that, and then from Tromsø alone it's 12 hours to get to Nordkapp, so that would be looking at 4 days, because you would want to take your time with that drive and not just slog it all in one go. So you'd be looking at 4 days just to get to Nordkapp, and the only reason you're really going there is just to say you've been to the top of Europe. So as much as I would like to see it, sometimes you've got to go, you know what, I want to focus on the scenery instead of this random achievement that perhaps doesn't mean that much, although it does.
We'll perhaps do it one day, but yeah, to add that in any sense. Same with Finland. There was an option to maybe get into a part of Finland as well, but throwing all that in, you know, to what we were already doing, would have robbed us all the kind of important times that we had spending it just around Sørvågen, and you know, we would have just had to do it as a whistle stop, which I think we made the right call by leaving all that out.
It's definitely sometimes worth going, right, there's so much here, let's just focus the trip onto, we've got 2 weeks, we'll do 1 week doing this part and then another week doing that part, and that's kind of what we did. So we had our week on the mainland exploring the cities and like drives into Sweden, drives down to Norway's national mountain, and then just shy of a week exploring all this stuff and having basically a really good time, but a focused time. Definitely a return trip, maybe do that Nordkapp and then come back and maybe look at Senja, which is similar to the Lofotens, but it's one island and it's kind of described as being Norway in miniature, and I'd really like to see that at some point. And again, I think to be able to do this area justice, you'd be looking at a couple of months to be able to explore absolutely everything. But when you're limited to a 2-week holiday, you've got to pick what you want to do on that trip and stick with it, and not worry too much about missing other things out.
I mean, even in this area, the Lofoten is the main sort of length of the chain, but there's actually another archipelago that kind of comes off it as well, up to the north somewhat, that's got some really nice things on it as well. So there's even that to look at, in addition to things like Senja as well. But it's amazing how immense this geographic area is. Like, I don't think you really get the sense of it from just looking at a map. I think you'd be surprised to find how many hours certain points on the map are from each other. It's Europe's last wilderness, I've heard it described as, and I can see that absolutely.
I think like an interesting point is, so we took 2 flights to get here, or 2 flights to get to Tromsø anyway, and the international flight Aberdeen to Bergen it's about an hour and 5, hour and 10 minutes depending on if you get caught with a good tailwind or not. And then the domestic flight from Bergen up to Tromsø is 2 hours, so that gives you an idea of the scale of the country as well, just how big Norway actually is.
And it's just, so I don't know what I'm going to say.
I think sometimes you're just watching the screen as well.
Yeah.
At the moment, to kind of put some context on what you're probably watching, as well as listen to us talk about whatever makes sense for this trip. So we're kind of now, we're on still on an island, but it's not one of the Lofoten Islands. It's like the preamble island, and it is nice in its own right. I think on the way in it felt really good. On this leg of the journey going back, I think just the length of the drive, as you can see, it's still a beautiful place, but it's not got that same impact as like the main show of the Lofotens.
Because we, on the way in, we were anticipating all those lovely mountains that you've already seen now. On the way out, we know that this just kind of slowly peters out a little bit. Eventually, once you get sort of proper mainland back past Narvik and that, you'll start to see the character of the mountains there, which is a completely different vibe from this place. But at this point, you're kind of almost in transition, so you're not quite one or the other now. But you know, plenty is still lovely. I mean, through some of these mountains in Scotland, you'd probably say that's definitely upper tier. I'm not having a go at Scotland, just you know what I mean though, these are just that little bit more.
I think it's one of these things where you got to plan as well a trip around the flights, and we basically had the option of flying back on the Friday or flying back on the Sunday. And if you fly back on the Sunday, you're at work first thing on the Monday morning. It's nice to have a day or so at home before you go back again. Ideally this drive should have been over 2 days, we crammed it into one, so if we knew that this was maybe coming towards the end of the day, we would have spent more time back in the other stuff in the morning, and then this would have maybe felt more at home. I don't know, it's one of those things you're not really sure of. You just kind of take it as it comes, but it's not to say that we didn't enjoy this area. I don't want it to sound like that. It just, at this point, it felt like we just have to get through this to get to the next stage of the journey, especially given that we probably would have been at back of 11 at this point, and that's when you, especially at an 8 o'clock start, you begin to think about lunch, but that's a while away yet.
Yeah. Just while we're in this sort of quieter bit, yeah, there was a special by the Grand Tour where they did a sort of drive from Norway through to the other side of Finland, basically, and yeah, it went through this route for a lot of it actually. I didn't realise until I rewatched it months after I'd been on the holiday and thought, hey, I've actually been to all these places. But it starts off at that Henningsvær with the football pitch, and it goes across that bridge. A lot of pickup shots going back and forth over that bridge.
Which is weird, because if you start in Henningsvær and then go to that bridge, you're in the wrong way from where they're actually going. But
yeah, I mean, it kind of, you know that these things are staged a bit, they're scripted, they're kind of put together just to tell a story more than be an accurate sort of a guide to the trip. But when you've actually been there, you pick up on those inaccuracies a lot more. You know, you kind of see, I know how they did that now. They kind of stitched this bit with that bit and shook it up a bit. They go into Sweden, the same bit that we went to, and make out that they've been going into it for hours and hours and hours into the dead of the night and whatnot. But we got there in an hour or two from the border where they ended up.
If that, I think it works out about like 25 miles or something. It's really not that far to where they were, but it's funny to kind of watch these things. Point of interest, the suspension bridge we crossed a minute or two ago, that's us now back onto mainland Norway, so we've left the islands. We will go into one more island, but we'll save that till right at the end of the video.
I think there's an airport, is it Narvik Airport's here somewhere, which is, we're not altogether close to Narvik, but
it's as close to Narvik as
you can land a plane, really.
There used to be an airport in Narvik, and what happened, this is us passing the airport now, I believe what happened is when they built the new bridge at Narvik, which you've probably seen if you've watched any of the previous videos, appears quite a lot because Narvik was kind of a base for a little while. The big bridge they built there, as part of the condition for building it, was to close Narvik City Airport and then relocate all the flights out to this one, which serves both Narvik and a place called Harstad, I believe, and it kind of sits equidistant between the two, which is why it's so far outside of the city it's meant to serve.
So we're kind of coming around the corner now, and then eventually we'll be hitting kind of just north of Narvik. There's still a little bit to go, but yeah, Narvik was our kind of base for a few days, and we the best kind of thing we did from there was, apart from Sweden as well, was we went kind of south from there for a little while, and some of the mountains there, which would be in one of your other videos, they've got this almost sort of Jurassic or Triassic kind of quality to them. Those really sort of prehistoric mountains that just have, they're like nothing else. They've just got the strangest shape. They're kind of adjacent to Norway's national mountain, which is called Stetend or Sleipned, which again has a really odd but amazing kind of shape. Not a high mountain by any means, but it's just so kind of perfectly crafted that there isn't really an equal mountain to it in Norway, so I can see why they voted it to be the national mountain.
I think the big mountain off to the right there was one of the massive ones behind Narvik itself, but Andrew's completely right in that the mountains that we were seeing to the south of Narvik, whereas the ones in the Lofotens are all big and grouped and lots of spikes, these are all individual, very defined, very almost alien-like peaks, and they were absolutely fantastic. They were unbelievable. The village or town here is where we stopped for lunch, and the interesting thing about, like, we stopped at a petrol station, and in Norwegian petrol stations you get such good food options compared to what you would get elsewhere. So I had this massive chicken burger that had basically every extra you could imagine on it. You get like hot dogs, pizzas, all sorts in these places. So if you're ever looking for something to eat in Norway, you can't work out where to go, just pull into a petrol station, you'll be absolutely fine.
I mean, it's obviously there's lots of traditional sort of Norwegian dishes, but it's not really known as a culinary centre the way a lot of northern countries aren't really. But for some reason, for likes of convenience food like that, it's just really well set up. Their sweeties as well are amazing. If you ever go, you have to take some back with you. They've got the mixed ones. They've got chocolate peanuts. They've got the topless bars. That's your favourite, isn't it? Really nice and crunchy. But yeah, just grab a handful of whatever you can while you're there, because it's really tasty.
And I think looking at where we are now, this is where, I'm not sure if we just passed it or if we're kind of heading away from it again, but we didn't really see any of this on our drive south because we got caught up in a blizzard, which was fun. Basically the last day in May, back home was looking at temperatures of about 22-23 degrees, and there was us driving through like -1 and 0 with snow falling all over the car and blocking the view, and it just made us feel like, yes, we are definitely in the Arctic.
It's just that right amount of Arctic coldness where you're not in perilous temperatures, but you can kind of kid on that you're kind of sort of like Amundsen or something, exploring these parts. It's great fun. But when you're driving, you know the bit where the Millennium Falcon goes into hyperdrive and the stars kind of elongate, that way, that's kind of what the snow looked like as you were driving through it.
Thankfully it wasn't lying on the roads. I think because it had been raining so much before then, it was fine, but it definitely gave like that extra layer of atmosphere. And when we were staying in Narvik, we went for a few like walks at the end of the evening up into the hills, and on that same night we were kind of walking around exploring, and thankfully we've noticed this little hut, so we thought, oh, we'll go check out this hut. And it was like a little viewing area, and just as we got there, another blizzard blew over, and we're like, at least we're standing inside here.
That was good fun. It was probably the most sort of adventurous part of the trip, was kind of negotiating that blizzard. But it just added to the sense of fun, and I really liked the novelty of kind of end of May going into June, of having sort of really quite cold temperatures, because I'm not really a heat seeker. I don't always enjoy even the summer in this country, but to be able to do that was just really refreshing, I found.
And I think this is us now coming into Setermoen, which on the drive south, again we took advantage of this and used the petrol station for lunch.
I used a little bit of that tiny bit of Norwegian I've been learning up to that point, and I think the cashier was appreciative of my effort. Definitely thought it was no good, but but I think she gave me a polite smile for making the try. So
that's at least one thing. You do want to feel like you're trying, but at the same time, I've got a friend that does stay in Norway, and his advice to me is, if you can't really speak it, just speak English. but I think people do appreciate the effort, even if what you're saying probably sounds horrific and stilted and not pronounced right in any respect whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean their command of English, generally speaking, is going to be so much better than what our command of Norwegian is. So yeah, go through the motion if you want to of making the gesture and then just revert back to English as soon as you get stuck.
Which for me would be after about 2-3 words. You would think after 10 trips to Norway I would be able to do it okay, but...
There's a sign for manual derogering. Again, an example of us butchering Norwegian. It's definitely not pronounced that way, but we always say that.
After getting clarification, it's manual derogering, and I'm probably again saying that wrong still. But at least you know they maintain the roads well here. I did notice compared to further south, these roads are a bit more rutted, but I'd imagine the snow chains are used for longer in this part. They're being under snow for so much of the year. These roads are going to get a bit more hammered than their more southern equivalents, but it is interesting to note that difference in quality between the north and the south.
Is this Bardufoss?
I think it was. We didn't go through here on the way down because we took a diversion, so this was our first time seeing it on the drive up.
We did the diversion, we saw a bridge, and then we went into the country a bit, and it was quite nice there because we found this church. We were just stopping for a bit of a photo shoot, and then the people that own the church actually invited us in to have a look and showed us around. It was really nice inside, and they were quite friendly and sort of asking us about Scotland and stuff like that. It just goes to show that the Norwegian locals around here are really friendly.
I think that's the thing that I've always found, is that people in Norway are quite quiet, but when they get to know you or they start speaking to you, they're very, very friendly, which is the way I like, 'cause it's probably how I am myself.
Similar to sort of Britain generally, I think, in a lot of senses. There's not that kind of immediate warmth or openness. They've got to kind of suss you out a little bit first, but when they do, then they'll be very nice to you and engage, and they'll have a good conversation with you.
Especially when you're showing interest in what they're doing as well, like with that church that we found. And if you do want to see these pictures, go watch my other videos. I hate myself.
You're shilling. I can't really remember what happens over this next bit. It's the start towards we're not a million miles from the sort of the Sammy Shop kind of area, are we?
And I think this is where it kind of, you get that kind of, the mountains around Tromsø were like rounded but very snowy and very kind of Arctic feeling. And this is us kind of getting to that stage.
I don't know if it's probably stopped by now, but all along this way you get loads of brown signs saying General Fleischer's Way, which is a reference to way back in World War II, because Narvik was a big sort of location in the war, and there's a lot of kind of German soldiers up here, and I should know because I have a history degree, but I honestly can't remember any facts or details about Narvik, so I think go and watch someone else's videos about that if you're interested. But yeah, big World War II place, famous battle there.
And the military influence up here is as strong as ever, given that Norway does have a Russian border right at the top. I'm sure you already know that, but because we're kind of getting towards that region, there was a lot of military presence in this area.
I think there's an old sub pen up here. Again, it appeared in the special for the Grand Tour. But yeah, I think that dates back to sort of Cold War times and the sort of more tense times back then, although they are getting pretty tense again now, so you never know.
But this is us kind of getting into that sort of Tromsø region. We're still maybe about an hour and a bit from there, but you can definitely start to feel that change in the environment again.
Yeah, we're definitely past the Sammy Shop, because that big box thing's there, so yeah, this really is the start of the beginning of that Tromsø environment. But I think there's a road off here somewhere, maybe, is this near to where the Finland road is?
Yeah, so if we were to go turn off here, so if we were to go the way that went, that would carry us on the E6, which eventually reaches Kirkenes, and the Russian border, but we've now turned off onto the E8. But if you were to follow the E8, kind of it goes back north again, then goes off to the right along the E6, that would take you to Finland. Again, if we'd done this over 2 days, maybe we could have squeezed in a quick trip, but we literally would have just been doing it to cross the border. So again, it's one of those, do we bother doing this? Is it worth investing the time to do so? And we decided ultimately, because of the length of this drive, not to bother.
So there's a lot of snow on the mountains still. There was even more at the very start of the holiday. It had perceptibly changed a little bit, but still, even at the end of the holiday, loads and loads of snow.
And at much lower levels than it was in the Lofotens as well.
Yeah.
Again, just showing how far north we've come even from that point.
And I think that snow I think snow always brings out the best in mountains. It allows you to see the kind of the shape of them a lot better, the kind of the contours. I think this is really the ideal level of snow almost, because it's highlighting the mountains, but it's not obstructing your way down below. You can have sort of free range to drive about wherever you want, but you still get that wintry feel.
Especially kind of when like the leaves are starting to green up as well, so you've got that kind of freshness down at sea level going into the snowy mountains, although I think this bit of road is a little bit higher up. This was completely, there was no leaves whatsoever when we drove south through this 2 weeks prior, so it's still a bit getting there, but definitely more green on this leg of the journey compared to when we started the trip.
So yeah, this is sort of like the final sort of stretch really. We're not all that far away from Tromsø, which is the sort of Arctic capital of Norway, and the biggest sort of, I think it's the biggest sort of settlement city. I don't think there's anything further north than there that's of any great significance.
I think Alta is maybe fairly large, but not as big as Tromsø. Tromsø is about 64,000 people, so you're looking at somewhere that's slightly bigger than, to give an example, I would say Perth, Scotland is about 50,000, so you're basically dumping the population of St Andrews on top of that, which probably means nothing if you don't know those places. But
I think the population of St Andrews is second homeowners anyway, so
screw them. We stopped there for a nice old bridge, just in case you wonder why there's those little cuts every now and then. But yeah, we're definitely on the home stretch at this point.
This is really the start of those mountains that define Tromsø, aren't they?
It's had a kind of weird feeling. When we first arrived there, I was a bit unsure about the city. It's very much a massive mix of all types of architecture, from classic historical Norwegian buildings to like your 60s concrete, going right into like these modern ones that are coming up. And I was initially unsure about it when we first got there, but then when we got back this time I was so glad to see it all again. And speaking of which, that's it coming up on the left hand side. We just passed the Soof.
Oh, the Soof. We never got used to the Soof. But here you'll see on the right is the cathedral, which that's it just there, that fin-shaped thing that we're passing now. That's an iconic one, as is this sort of bridge. You'll see them kind of put together in a photo composition a lot. And behind all that was the cable car that took you up, the gondola took you to the top of the mountain that overlooks Tromsø, and you have some of the most amazing views you can imagine. That was what we did on the first day, and again it's one of those things you have to do when you're there.
And we decided to do it on the first day. We'd just come off the flight, settled into the hotel and thought, it's not going to get dark, let's go up the cable car and have a look at the city from above. And it was a really nice way of kind of kicking off the holiday. Sorry that you're not getting to see too much of the actual city. It's nice enough to drive around, but the tunnels are quicker and safer. So
another classic Norwegian thing, that you can navigate the entirety of a city just underground.
And that's us going through what we call the back cave, because it would kind of link to a load of car parks, and then it drops you off just north of the busiest part of the city, so you can avoid the traffic. You can see what I mean by that mix of buildings. It is really nice, and I would love to come back here and enjoy it again. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you have, hopefully you've enjoyed the drive as much as we enjoyed actually doing it.